So many of you might be thinking, well, if she's a slave, how is she also an abolitionist? Because you probably have the insight that if you're a slave, you don't really have the platform to be able to speak and talk about things that are important to you. That's a really good question. And the answer to that is that at the time that Sojourner Truth, back then Isabella Baumfree, was a slave, there were still laws in place in New York allowing people to have slaves. That law went away in 1828. Okay, so in 1828, New York passed a law that says, hey, no more slavery up here. But Isabella Baumfree, aka Sojourner Truth, did not want to wait that long. So in 1827, she decided to escape. She took her infant daughter along with her, and she went to a nearby abolitionist's house, a white family who were abolitionists as well, and she was able to escape from slavery. And then the law was passed, and up north in New York they were free. So in 1828, the same year that the law was passed in New York, Isabella Baumfree, aka Sojourner Truth, moved to New York City, and she began to work under a minister. She began to work in a church, and she was learning a lot, and she was preaching the different words of the Bible and things of that nature. Through that experience, she was able to become very, very passionate and really good at speaking. She was very charismatic, and she had quite the presence because she was a 6-foot tall African American woman who spoke like she really knew what she wanted and what she believed in. At that time, they're not used to seeing a woman with such presence, especially someone who's African American, because they're so used to slaves being kept down. And so Sojourner Truth had this really great calling in speaking. So let's take a look at the different things we have written here. So in the first column, it tells you what an abolitionist is. It is a person who wants to end slavery. That's a very simple definition, but when it comes down to it, that's what an abolitionist is. Now, going back to the part about her being a really great charismatic speaker, she gave a lot of speeches. She gave powerful speeches about the evils of slavery. She did this a lot. She gave a ton of speeches during her lifetime. And the most incredible thing is that she never learned to read and write. As you can imagine, growing up on a plantation or growing up as a slave, a lot of slave masters did not want you to learn to read and write because that would give you the strength and power in order to become smarter and to be able to find ways out of your situation, which they didn't want. And so Sojourner Truth really kind of dug into being able to preach and speak from her heart and from her soul without having to actually read it off of something or write it down. And that just goes to show you what an incredible person she is, because she was able to just find the way to articulate what she wanted to say without even thinking it out and writing it down first. Now, around this time when she was giving these speeches in the church and she was working under the minister, she felt as though, because her name was still Isabella Baumfree at the time, she felt as though there was a higher calling. There was a higher power telling her that she was the one to tell the truth. And so that's when she changed her name to Sojourner Truth. So from about 1828 on, she's known as Sojourner Truth and no longer Isabella Baumfree. Now, she wasn't alone in this fight as an abolitionist. Now, there were quite a few abolitionists, but in her inspiration column, as you can see there all the way on the right, Sojourner Truth was not only motivated by her own experiences of the harshness that she faced as a slave and seeing what it did to the people around her, but she was also inspired by a man named Frederick Douglass, who was an incredible, incredible human being. He was a former slave and an extremely intelligent man. He was African American, as you can imagine as well, since he was a slave. And then William Lloyd Garrison, who was a white man. However, he was still an abolitionist, and he spoke out against the popular opinion at the time that people should be kept as slaves. Okay? So abolitionism was a huge part of her identity, getting rid of slavery. Let's jump into the next topic.